Good afternoon again. My name is Jeremy Benamy, and I'm coming to you from Chicago, Illinois, and really pleased to be able to share with you and with the public both some recently collected data about American Jewish voting patterns in the 2024 election, and also a bit of information about J Street's political accomplishments in the 2024 cycle, as well as our policy agenda moving forward. Obviously, this election at the national and the top of the ticket level did not go as J Street had hoped. J Street did actively campaign for and support and endorse Kamala Harris and Tim Walz for president and vice president. We were the largest Jewish institutional funder of the campaign, raising nearly $6 million for the campaign, and we provided volunteers and phone banks and staff embeds, and we did a whole series of work for the campaign. And like so many of you in the J Street community, we were deeply devastated and disappointed and felt a wide range of emotions in the wake of the results of Tuesday evening. We felt going into the election that the stakes of this election couldn't be higher, that the future of our country was on the line, and now the decision by the American people has been made, and we will respect it as President Biden and Vice President Harris have set such a fine example of how one deals in a democracy with setbacks and with defeat. And we will move forward. We have already said how committed we are to the principles and the values that we have as a movement, as an organization. We will be leading in the opposition, both to the Trump Vance agenda in the next 4 years, and we will also be tying that to our opposition to the extreme right government of Benjamin Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, and the values and the principles that those two forces hold and the directions they're taking their country couldn't be more at odds with the values and the principles of J Street. And we are proud to be the political home for so many in the American Jewish community who share our values and also are deeply disappointed by the outcome. And that provides an excellent segue into the meat of our presentation on the webinar today. We will be bringing into the conversation now Jim Gerstein, who is the partner and principal in GBAO Strategies in Washington, D.C., one of the nation's premier polling firms, involved in hundreds at this point of campaigns over the last several cycles at the national, state, and local level. Jim has been doing exit polling now with J Street for what is it now? I think at least the 14 years since 2010, we've been doing election night polls, and it goes back to 2008 to the start of J Street. We did our first polling together. So Jim is an expert in not only public opinion generally, but really public opinion in the American Jewish community. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim for about a 15-minute presentations on the top lines of our findings, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. We'll be using the Q&A box, the Q&A function on your Zoom. And so please feel free to put questions into the Q&A, and I'll be moderating about 15 minutes of questions when you're done, Jim. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you to J Street and the entire community that's on this call for everything that folks did in this election and continue to do. It is, as somebody who's on the campaign side of many races, it is always heartening to see what J Street is doing to help and impact these races for candidates that share J Street's values and other democratic values. So during these horrible times or a horrible outcome, I hope folks do take some comfort in knowing that J Street has done amazing work that is known and appreciated across the political industry and political world. I'm going to share my screen now and jump into the data, which, as Jerry mentioned, we do this survey every election to get a real understanding of how American Jews are viewing politics, how they're viewing issues related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and all the things that emanate from that, and all the work that, and to understand how Jews feel about the sorts of work and values that J Street carries. And I believe it's a real service to the community. So I'm very excited to present this. We did 2 surveys. One was a national survey of 800 people who say of Jewish people who say they voted in the election. We also did a survey of 500 Jewish people who say they voted in the election. The overall story that comes out of this is that, first of all, Kamala Harris overwhelmingly won the vote, the Jewish vote, 71-26. That performance reflects the usual or traditional levels of support that Democratic candidates for either president or Congress have received from Jewish voters over the past decade. I think it's very clear as we're looking at the Democratic coalition that American Jews are, year in and year out, election after election, demonstrate that they are a base Democratic constituency, despite all the claims that there may be shifts. We just don't see it in the data. This has been a very hard year for American Jews and Jews around the world, and Jews in Israel, of course, in the aftermath of October 7th. And concern about that, about those issues, and specifically Israel and anti-Semitism, are high among Jewish voters. But their vote, when they say what's driving their vote for the election and for president, it centers on the future of democracy and abortion. Those are the top voting issues. And it's notable that these were the top issues in the 2022 election. And so this intervening event of October 7th didn't shift where people and how much people prioritize those 2 issues. Jewish voters believe that you can be both pro-Israel and critical of Israeli government policy at the same time. This is a fundamental understanding and principle among American Jews. We've seen this very steady over time, that belief and value. But going deeper, you can see that they are very negative towards Benjamin Netanyahu. They do seek negotiations over military action as the way to address Iran's nuclear program. And Jewish voters in America also overwhelmingly support diplomatic agreements to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that do include a demilitarized Palestinian state. Finally, I think it's important to recognize that Republicans spent tens of millions of dollars in this election targeting the Jewish vote, specifically Kamala Harris's policies as it relates to Israel or anti-Semitism, and not even a policy, but also just a general perception that she was weak on these things. And this failed miserably. And the failure is rooted in the fact that Jews in America support Kamala Harris both personally, and they share her values, and they support her policies. At the same time, they intensely oppose Donald Trump, both as an individual and personally, but also on what he stands for in terms of policy. So that is the overall summary of what happened with the Jewish vote. When you look at the numbers that stand behind this, or the evidence for how we come up with those conclusions, the first one is you can see here how much Jews like Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. This is a favorability rating of 69% favorable and 30% unfavorable. You'll see a few things that are noteworthy here. First of all, she's actually more popular than Joe Biden, and who remains very popular with Jewish voters, as well as the Democratic Party. These are very strong favorability ratings. You contrast that with the Republican Party and Donald Trump. They both have unfavorable ratings of 71%. All these claims that the Republicans are making inroads with the Jewish vote are kind of absurd, but also it'll never happen as long as the Jews are so hostile towards both the leader of the Republican Party and the Republican Party itself. And these are not new ratings. This is very steady over time, and it's evidence that the Republican Party isn't doing anything with Jews that would change their perceptions of the Republicans or of Donald Trump. You'll see here also, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the Israel section, but Netanyahu is also very unpopular with Jewish voters, a 32 favorable, 63 unfavorable, which is quite remarkable for somebody who's in the office of the Prime Minister of Israel during a time of war. When we try to put the vote in context, here you see the 71-26 that Harris carried with the national Jewish vote. And you look at this time series here. Jeremy mentioned we've been doing these election night surveys going back to 2010. So in these midterm elections of 10, 14, 18, et cetera, you can see that the Democratic candidate for Congress got somewhere between 66 to 74% of the vote. And when you look at the presidential years, 12, 16, 20, 24, that with the exception of 2020, the average has really been right there in the 70 to 71% range. I believe that what we see here in 2018 and 2020 are reactions to Trump personally and how he was conducting himself while in office, and in 2020 a real peak in the midst of the COVID pandemic, where we saw Joe Biden win nationally by almost 5 points with the general population. You can see here across the Jewish community or across the Jewish electorate, there's overwhelming support for Kamala Harris in this election, with the exception of one demographic, and that being the Orthodox population. So you can see, for example, she won among Reform Jews 83% to 14%. Among Orthodox, Trump won 86 to 12. The Orthodox population makes up 9% of the Jewish electorate. So it's a minority of a minority that supports Trump, but definitely it gets a lot of attention in public discourse. So you can see here, there's also a gender gap where Jewish women supported Harris more than Jewish men did, but still, these are very high levels of support that far exceed support within the general population, but are reflective of the gender gap that we saw in the general population and also exists with the Jewish population. As I mentioned earlier, the top issues were the future of democracy and abortion. When people are asked what are the most important issues when deciding how you will vote in the November election, you can see here, 53-38. In 2022, this was a 55 and a 40. So despite October 7th, nothing changed in terms of the voting priorities. You can see here other issues that are second and third tier. Israel comes in here at 14%. We also asked people if Israel is a deal breaker issue for them, and it is not. It's very easy for candidates to pass a threshold of credibility on Israel. Kamala Harris far exceeded that threshold, but across the board, candidates typically pass that threshold of credibility, and Jewish voters turn to these other issues that affect them on a day-to-day basis. You can see the only group here that prioritizes Israel is the Orthodox population. Among Reform, Conservative, and Jews who say they don't have a denomination, the future of democracy is the top issue, and abortion is the second most important issue as well. The last thing I'd like to say when thinking about the political dynamics here is we did ask people about whether or not they approve or disapprove of AIPAC endorsing and raising money for members of Congress who support Israel, but voted against certifying the 2020 presidential election. And you can see here, I think this really captures the political dynamic for Jewish voters. They support Israel, they care about Israel, but they do not want to back somebody. Even if they support Israel, they don't want to back somebody, and they don't want to see Jewish organizations backing people who voted against, who are kind of in this MAGA Republican world, the people who voted against certifying the 2020 presidential election. And it's not even close. You can see only 29% approved of that action compared to 71% who disapprove. And among those who disapprove, it's very intense. It's 52% who say they strongly disapprove. So I think that kind of is a good way of encapsulating the dynamic and how Jews view American politics and supporting Israel and Jewish organizations and what they're seeking. Very briefly, you can see in Pennsylvania, which was the swing state in the presidential election that had the largest Jewish population. We wanted to see if things were different there. It was slightly more support for Harris in Pennsylvania, where the campaign was really waged. One of the states where it was really waged, Jewish voters gave her a 75-23 victory in Pennsylvania. And you can see the congressional vote is very comparable as well. But, just a few points higher than what we saw nationally. So where a campaign takes place and where lots of money from the Republicans was spent targeting the Jewish vote, you can see in that environment, Jewish voters were stronger for harassed than they were even in the national environment. When we look at Iran, as we know, it's a very, very important issue and timely issue. We asked two questions to understand Jewish voters' views on what's going on and how to address it. Specifically, we gave them the information about the agreement that was reached before, how Trump withdrew from it when he was president, negotiations stalled to revive the agreement, stalled during the Biden presidency. And we asked people, do they think that the U.S. should or should not restart negotiations with Iran in order to reach an agreement that would both prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons in exchange for lifting sanctions against Iran. 64% say that they do want the U.S. to restart negotiations with Iran, compared to 36% who say we should not. And we posed it in a different way as well to get more of the conceptual and principled view of it, and very similar results. We asked people which comes closer to their own opinion, and you can see that people believe that the most effective way to address U.S. and Israeli concerns about Iran's nuclear program is through diplomacy and negotiation, as opposed to the most effective way being through military action. So it's a very clear majority that says that they prefer, when it comes specifically to addressing Iran's nuclear program, they much prefer diplomacy and negotiation instead of military action. So I think those two questions give you a pretty clear sense of the divide or the strong support that Jews have for negotiations and to address the Iranian threat. We look specifically at Israel, and I alluded to some of this at the very beginning. A basic question that we ask repeatedly in our surveys for J Street is whether or not people think you can be both pro-Israel and critical of Israeli government policies. Are those things compatible? And this is one of those rare areas where you have near universal agreement among the Jewish population. 90% say that yes, somebody can be both pro-Israel and critical of Israeli government policies. Those two things are not incompatible. And what's very interesting about this data here is when we asked the same question in 2022, it was the same result, 89 to 11. In between 2022 and 2024, in between these two surveys, we've had the traumatic events of October 7th and the war and the aftermath of all of this. And despite this major event and this major issue and discussion running through the Jewish community, as well as the world at large, on this basic principled belief, nothing changed. There's a remarkable consistency independent of events that unfold. I think this is also very interesting when we think about the political battles ahead. That Netanyahu, when we ask his favorable, unfavorable rating, we've been doing this going back all the way to 2008. What you can see here is the office of the prime minister automatically yielded a positive favorability for a long time. And you can see if we pick a point in time and start, say, in 2012, he had a plus 27 favorable to unfavorable, this 47 to 20. What happened was when he attacked the Iran agreement and came to Congress, a Republican Congress, and attacked an agreement negotiated by the Democratic president, that's when we started to see his favorability fall. And then it really crashed during the Trump presidency when he and Trump embraced each other. And for the last 4 years, he's had a negative favorability of minus 30. I mean, and today it's minus 31. I think it's pretty telling about how Jews are viewing both politics in America and in Israel. There is very strong support for a final status agreement. You can see the details here. I should add that all of this is up on J Street's website. So if I'm going too fast for you and you want to spend some time digging into the details of these questions, it's all up there. What you see here, though, is it's 68% support a final status agreement. I would characterize this as the kind of traditional bilateral agreement that's been negotiated over several years. It includes some details like a demilitarized Palestinian state. 68 to 32 margin on this question. We asked a different question as well for in the survey, where we presented it more as a regional security agreement as opposed to the bilateral agreement. And this one includes the Arab states led by Saudi Arabia establishing full diplomatic and economic ties with Israel. 74% support that. So you can see slightly larger support for the regional security agreement ahead of the bilateral agreement, both with overwhelming support. That bilateral agreement question we've asked over for many years, and the support for that is the same this year as it was in 2022. Finally, two other points that I want to close on. The first is we asked about policy initiatives and what people, whether they would favor or oppose different policy initiatives in the next administration. The two strongest here, but you can see they have the widest breadth of support, is a major speech from the new president detailing an American proposal for a regional security agreement, including Palestinian state. 72% support that, not as intensely as these others. You can see 32% strongly favor that agreement, that initiative. Also, but the one that has the most intense support is increasing humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. 71% favor that policy, including 42%. So they strongly favor it. Without going into detail on all the others, I would just note here that people have no problem or take no issue with sanctioning far-right ministers like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich for their support for settlers who are committing violence. So 66% support sanctions on those two, including 38% who strongly favor that. Finally, we did ask some questions about anti-Semitism to see if people believe certain things were or were not anti-Semitic. You can see at the top, the strongest one is praising the October 7th attack. That has almost universal agreement that is an anti-Semitic statement, or that people believe that praising it is anti-Semitic. The other one that gets pretty near universal support is opposing Israel's right to exist. 87% believe that is anti-Semitic. You can see some of these others on this list, and they're in decreasing order of agreement that it's anti-Semitic. I would highlight this one about Donald Trump and the statements he made about Jews hating their religion. If they vote for Democrats, 65% believe that statement is anti-Semitic. That, I think, goes beyond this whole idea of him coddling anti-Semites and white supremacists. This is about him himself and what he is saying, and 65% say that is anti-Semitic. Finally, at the bottom, you can see the lowest one here. Only 29% would say that criticism of how Israel is conducting the war in Gaza is anti-Semitic. That is driven heavily by the Orthodox population that would believe that's anti-Semitic. So I'm going to pause there. I believe we'll take questions now, and if anything doesn't get answered, or please, I really encourage you to go to the website and scour through the data.
Thanks so much, Jim. I think you can take down the sharing, and we put the link for jstreet.org/polling into the chat, and we're very, very transparent. And Jim is always very transparent with his data and the crosstabs and the questionnaire. And there's a full memo and a press release and just all the data from all of our polls over all the years. So I do encourage you to go to the website to get that information. There's about 15 to 20 questions in the chat. I'm going to try to group them into different types. One is a sort of methodological set of questions, for people who don't know polling all that well. There's one question about these seem like very small samples, and they've seen the exit polls, which have tens of thousands of people. Isn't 500 or 800 a very small sample? And what does polling usually work with, and how does that shape up? And does that give you data about all 50 states or not? Can you parse the data down to the state level? So sample size, state level, and then there's a couple of questions about young versus old. It seems that young Jews are a little bit more right of center than older Jews, and wondering what the reason is and if that's in fact reading the data correctly. So if we can start with those three, and then I'll keep going.
Terrific. So in terms of the methodology and the sample size, 800 is a traditional sample size for a statewide survey and for many national surveys. The margin of error on that is plus or minus 3.5%. and it's large enough for us to look at major demographic subgroups such as denomination or age, gender, things like that. It does not give us a large enough sample size to look at it state by state. This is a national sample, and it's representative of the Jewish population. We weight the data to Pew, which is Pew's data of the Jewish population, which really is the kind of gold standard of Jewish research. So we are able to collect a representative sample. We contact people who are registered voters and appear on a sample of national sample of registered voters. In Pennsylvania, the 500 statewide sample is also pretty robust for a small constituency like the Jewish population. And as it relates to the exit polls that folks have seen, some that have larger sample sizes of Jews, some that have lower. With the exit polls, I don't look at the size of the sample. I basically am looking at the fact that they aren't Jewish surveys. They are not asking the screening questions that Pew uses and that Jewish academics use to collect what is a representative sample of Jews. They don't ask denomination. They also exclude about 27% of the Jewish population that says that they're Jewish, but they aren't religiously Jewish. So the exit polls, we just don't really look at those as polls of Jews. On the young versus old question, it's a great question. The reason that young number looks a little less supportive of the Democrats than the older generations is largely driven by the fact that the Orthodox population is disproportionately young. And so that skews the younger vote results. And you can, when you take out the Orthodox population, the younger voters look a lot more like the rest of the Jewish population of the other generations.
So a couple of questions that I think you probably can't answer, but I at least want to acknowledge that they were asked. One set of questions is about how do you get a feel for how many Jews may have stayed home? There's a question, you've said who voted and how they voted, but then perhaps what really hurt Harris was that a group of people were so turned off they just stayed home. So that's one question. And then the other question, again, it's not something in this data, but maybe you have some other data, is whether or not in the Arab population, the Muslim American population, Arab population, two separate groups, by the way, very important to bear that in mind. If those two groups might have voted differently, if the types of policies that test well with American Jews had actually been adopted by the Harris campaign, would there have been a way to reach them? Another thing that was asked was about having a Palestinian speaker at the convention. Again, you didn't test that, but I'm wondering if you have any data that might speak to any of those questions.
Sure. So it may be a slightly unsatisfactory answer in that we don't have a way of understanding turnout because the registered vote the registered voter samples don't ask religion. We have to go through a series of screening questions. So you can't go back and retrofit it after the election and say, oh, the people who voted and didn't vote are labeled on the voter file as Jewish or not in a reliable way. So we're unable to do that. As opposed to when you can do that by race, because race is on the voter file in most states, but also modeled well in many states as well. So I don't have a satisfactory answer on turnout, with the exception of saying that there is higher turnout among higher educated voters, college educated voters and voters with a post-grad degree, of which Jews are disproportionately educated relative to the rest of the population. So you can extrapolate a little bit out of that Jewish turnout is higher than that of the rest of the population. The other piece of the question, in terms of people who may have been turned off by administration policy that was too hawkish, or however you want to characterize it, we did not see much of a Jill Stein vote in the Jewish electorate. And I think that's where those things may be, where you may start to pick those up. So we don't have much evidence that of that. I would say that the message that Kamala Harris delivered at the convention in her speech, that both talked about the pain suffered on both sides of this conflict, I think resonates very well with the broader Jewish population. With regards to Arab population. We did not survey this. I have seen some results from Dearborn, Michigan, which is not, that is just one community in a larger, it doesn't necessarily reflect the Arab population outside of Dearborn, but in Dearborn, the initial, or the vote count that I've seen was 42% for Trump, 38 for Harris, and 18% for Jill Stein. So that, I'm sorry, 42, 38, 18. Those were the numbers that I saw. Whereas in the previous election, it was about 70% for Joe Biden. So yeah, you can see how how a large part of the vote in Dearborn did move toward toward Jill Stein as from Biden 2020. But I don't have anything beyond what we've seen in Dearborn.
Terrific. I'll try to do another round, maybe two, and then we'll switch over to a political update from the JStreetPAC point of view. I also want to add, there was a question whether or not we think as J Street that it was a mistake not to allow a Palestinian speaker. And we said at the time, and we tried to weigh in with the DNC, that we felt it was very important for there to be a Palestinian American speaker, not a decision to be made at 4 o'clock on Thursday of the convention, but it should have been planned weeks ahead, and there should have been a sense of balance in the program. So we were supportive of that. A couple of things people are wondering if you tested. Did you test how American Jews felt about Trump's racism? Did you test how impactful or where people fell on his attacks on transgender people? Did that have, was there a repulsion against that, or was that something that people agreed with? I don't know if you've tested that. And then what about military aid and the attitude of American Jews towards military aid? And so those are three I'm lumping together as one.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to start with the last question on military aid, because that was one where we specifically did ask that in this survey. And what we did see in here was support for, and you'll see this on the website, but we asked specifically whether or not you would favor an initiative to continue providing Israel with defensive weapons like anti-ballistic missile systems, but withhold American shipments of offensive weapons like 2,000-pound bombs until Netanyahu agrees to an American proposal for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for a release of the Israeli hostages. That framing of it, or that initiative, has 62% support among Jewish voters. So there is a sizable majority that does support that sort of conditioning of military aid. In terms of Trump's racism, wasn't tested in this survey specifically. The only thing that we did get at was at the issue of anti-Semitism, which I mentioned earlier, where 65% found his comments about Jews to be anti-Semitic. We've seen in other surveys that we've done during the course of this election with Jewish voters as well, to see high levels of concern and characterization of his comments as anti-Semitic, along the range of things that he has said that's offensive to Jewish voters. And we did not in the survey ask about transgender issues and the attacks that Republicans launched against candidates, including Kamala Harris, but also down the ballot. There's a lot of work being done right now examining the impact of the different ads among attacking Democrats on transgender issues. And I'm sure folks know what I'm talking about because they were all over TV. So that it's not conclusive yet, the level of impact that had in this election.
All right, one final round, mishmashing together a number of different questions. How do you know who is Jewish? So just what's your definition? How do you get to that? A question about whether or not there's any chance that higher dissatisfaction among younger Jews could be driven by their support for the sort of opposition to what's happening in Gaza. So rather, you said that it was probably, do you have crosstab data that show where that came from? So that's the second one. Third, is the increase in the percentage of Jewish men voting for Trump significant. It looks as if it's higher than in prior years. Third, and then fourth, which gives you a chance to wrap it up, that there still continues to be this presumption out there, anecdotal, and we see it in some of the Jewish press that we read, you and I both, that how Kamala's loss had something to do with a loss of support among Jewish voters. And so where does that come from? If the data doesn't show it, why is it so prevalent in the discourse? So those 4 questions, if you can try to find a way to answer them in 2 minutes, that'd be great.
Okay, well, I will start with the quickest one and the easy one. It is the idea that she lost ground with Jewish voters in this due to this and that this characterization of it, it's absurd. I mean, there's just no evidence of it. And why is that? I think that there is just a lot of money spent by people who are very passionate and wealthy on this issue to try and characterize Democrats as weak. And to build support for the Netanyahu agenda. That's why I think the press year in and year out falls for it, and the data afterwards then demonstrates that that is an inaccurate portrayal. In terms of who is Jewish, we ask is a list of registered voters, national sample. And there are flags on there for people who have Jewish names, first name or last name, or based on where if they live in areas that have a high percentage of Jewish people living there. Those are modeled on the voter file. They get a text that says, please click here to take a survey. In the very beginning of the survey, we ask people, what is your religion? And if they say Jewish, they are admitted into the survey, and they're asked what their denomination is and whether they belong to synagogue, a range of things that we can measure against Pew's data. And if they don't say that they're Jewish, if they say, I don't have a religion, or I'm atheist, or I'm agnostic, they get a follow-up question asking them, well, even though you don't say your religion is Jewish, do you consider yourself Jewish? And if they say yes, then they get into the survey and get all those other demographic questions asked as well. And that is the rigorous way that Pew does it, and that's what we follow as our model. So that is how people get into the survey and whether or not they are whether they're Jewish or considered Jewish. The other 2 questions were the increase in Jewish men. I'd have to go back and look at the time series data on that among Jewish men. 62% is a high level of support among Jewish men. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and see what it was in the previous few elections. I'll start by looking at 2016 and 2012, which are comparable results, but I suspect it's fairly stable. And then the last question was about the higher dissatisfaction among younger Jews with administration policy towards Israel, not being too supportive of Israel. We didn't get at that specifically in here. I can say that the policy initiatives are even more popular and stronger among younger Jews. These things like increasing humanitarian aid and conditioning the aid to Israel as we presented it. It didn't lead to Jewish voters, younger Jewish voters, not voting for Kamala Harris, but you can see that there's greater support for these policies that are supporting aid to the Palestinians or conditioning aid, things like that. And on the anti-Semitism questions, we do see a very clear generational difference where younger Jews are just they're not as likely to say things are anti-Semitic compared to the older generations, including the protests on college campuses. They're less likely to characterize those as anti-Semitic compared to the older generations. Again, there's no evidence that any of those different opinions among younger Jews led to them not voting for Harris. But we do see that they could hold 2 thoughts in their heads at once in terms of some concerns about how the U.S. was conducting or approaching Israel during the course of the conflict, and still supporting the Democratic ticket for president.
Thank you very much to Jim Gerstein. As always, an incredibly informative half hour, and there is just so much more in the data. I really do invite you to go to the website. There were a few more questions in the Q&A box, and I think some of the answers to those questions might be found in the data, and so I encourage everybody to go there. Thank you very much, Jim. We have 2 more parts to this webinar. We will try to get done by 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central, 1:30 Pacific. First, I want to give you a brief political update. Our political director, Tali DeGroot, would have been with us, but had some travel timing difficulties, and I wanted to give her the honor and the glory of running through the successful cycle that the J Street political team had. Many of those who are on this webinar and are going to be watching it, of course, are J Street supporters. You have used JStreetPAC as your vehicle for political contributions to political candidates. We raised in total nearly $15 million this cycle for federal candidates, including the $6 million for the Harris-Walz ticket, about $9 million for Senate and House candidates. We were the largest Jewish institutional bundler for the Harris campaign. We're also one of the larger national political operations as a whole now at 15 million. We're one of the larger bundling operations. We endorsed over 150 candidates who were actually up for election on election day. And among, for instance, House incumbents, 98% of our House incumbents won. We had 7 races in which we endorsed in an open seat, and 7 out of 7, all 7 of those won in the House. On challenger candidates, it was a very difficult year. We tended to endorse Democratic challengers against Republican incumbents, and there were very few wins in that category. Some of these remain too close to call. There are still 12 seats out there, as far as I know, going into this webinar, that are still too close to call. We did lose, at this point, 11 out of the 16 races in which we have endorsed. 4 of them are too close to call. 1 of them was a win. And in the Senate, we had some unfortunate losses where we saw incumbents that we endorsed, whether John Tester and Sherrod Brown, declared for sure as losing. The race in Pennsylvania has been called, although I understand that there's still a little bit of dispute about that, but it is possible that out of the 14 incumbent senators that we endorsed, that 11 will have won. There were 4 open seats, including some very exciting wins. I'll just say that it's historic to have Angela Alsobrooks and Lisa Blunt Rochester heading to the Senate, the 4th and 5th African-American women ever to serve in the Senate, both J Street endorsees. Lisa Blunt Rochester's House seat in Delaware is being taken by the first transgender representative in Congress, and that's also historic, very exciting. Sarah McBride, we're proud to support Sarah as well. We're going to end the cycle with a higher percentage of endorsees in Congress than we started the cycle, and we should probably have close to 3/4 of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate will be J Street endorsed, and over 55%, and it may still go up if these last few races are called for the candidates that we have endorsed. As I said, I think we have 12 left to go, and they're all in close races, which tells you that J Street endorses in the close races. We don't just take the easy outs here. We endorse in the races where our resources are most important and the candidates are most grateful and the races are the tightest. And so all in all, it was a successful cycle from the perspective of J Street's continued growth of support in Congress and the continued reach of our political work. More donors, more dollars, more endorsees, more wins, more representatives in Congress at the end of the cycle than ever before. I am very, very grateful to the J Street political team, and of course to all of you who are watching who have been J Street supporters and donors, and particularly using JStreetPAC.org to make your political contributions, and we hope that will continue in the next cycle. There were a few questions in the Q&A about where do we go from here, and obviously there are several different pieces to the work ahead. Job one is going to be winning the next time the elections roll around. The political arena is not a one-time event. There's no finish line at which you cross it and you say, our work here is done and we're not doing any more. Politics is a marathon that is historic and epic in nature. This was one chapter. There were a number of painful losses this chapter, and I know that we are all deeply struggling in our own ways with the results of this election. But the only option for change is through political change and through a different result in the next election. And J Street will be 100% back, all in, working to ensure that pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy candidates are back in control of both houses of Congress after the 26 elections, and also looking ahead to the 28 presidential cycle. So we are not in any way deterred from the core of our mission, which is to change American politics and the nature of the discourse on these issues in the political arena. And so that's going to be certainly job one. But job two is our lobbying work. And for that, I'm going to bring in our Deputy Director of Government Relations, Lily Edelstein. And I would like to say hi to Lily in front of our national audience, and hope you're feeling better. And I would like to ask you if you could run through, I see the second job of the to-do list is these next 70 days. The Biden administration has 70 days left in office. Congress has about 2 months, a little under 2 months left, and it's maybe 5 work weeks left in its session. And there is a lot that can be done in this period of time, and there's historical precedent for that. So please run us through the J Street agenda for the coming 2 months.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, you've laid out the context really well. I think for a lot of us, our minds are kind of in the past and in the future following January 20th. But I really want to take this moment to draw our attention to the next 70 plus days and what we can accomplish together. And I'm really excited about that. So to be very clear, what do we want to see from the Biden administration over the course of the next 70 days, 73 days? There are 3 things. One, we want to see this administration take steps to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, take steps to bring an end to the war in Gaza and Lebanon. 2, protect against further acts of annexation and violence in the West Bank. And 3, put forward proactively a vision for what regional peace between Israel and all of the Arab states, what that looks like, how it can be achieved, and how to ensure that Palestinian statehood is a priority within that effort. So getting the administration to take those actions, it's a big feat among the many, many priorities that they have over the next 70 days. So we're really thinking about what can Congress do to really ensure that those administrative actions take place. So under that first bucket that I mentioned, the administration taking action to help bring an end to the war in Gaza and Lebanon and address the humanitarian crisis. One major thing that Congress can do is welcome the letter that Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin sent on October 13th to Israel, calling out the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza and Israel's role in that, and giving Israel 30 days to live up to the assurances that it provided in March of 2024, and live up to the requirements and that were laid out in that letter, and to demonstrate that Israel is helping to facilitate humanitarian assistance. And so one thing that we really want to see members of Congress do is lift up that letter and lift up those requirements, and demand from the administration a full assessment on whether Israel was compliant with those requirements and U.S. law, make a final judgment on Israel's compliance, and then ultimately take the necessary action given the findings of that assessment. And if necessary and if appropriate, be willing to withhold certain offensive aid to Israel to ensure that U.S. law is upheld, as it is to all of our allies and security assistance recipients. The next big thing under, ensuring humanitarian assistance and ensuring that U.S. law is fully enforced and helping the administration bring an end to the war in Gaza and Lebanon, is again that last piece that I mentioned of fully enforcing and ensuring that U.S. security assistance to Israel is not a blank check, and that U.S. law and U.S. policy is not an empty promise. And so one thing that we are recommending to members of Congress is to support legislative vehicles that make clear that the U.S. is willing to suspend certain shipments of offensive weapons to demonstrate seriousness about enforcing U.S. law. And if Israel is out of compliance with U.S. law, out of compliance with international law. So that's sort of like the first big bucket. The second one is addressing and protecting against further actions of annexation and violence in the West Bank. And the biggest thing here is for Congress to really impress upon the administration, call on the administration to use the tools that the administration created, the executive order that Biden issued in February, Executive Order 14115, that gives him the authority to sanction Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and entities that are supporting settlement expansion and settler violence in the West Bank. And this would be a major step, but we know that there is support in Congress for this action. And that is something that we are very much hoping to see Congress take continued action on when they return later this month, and also to support the administration in taking this step before Biden leaves office on January 20th. The other big thing that members of Congress can do in supporting administrative action to address the spiraling situation in the West Bank is indicating to the administration that they would be supportive of the U.S. allowing the UN Security Council to pass a measured and appropriate resolution reaffirming that unilateral annexation of Palestinian territories is against international law. And this would also be a big step and something within the scope of members of Congress to support the administration in doing. And the third big bucket is something that is very unique to Biden and his history and his relationship to this issue and his relationship to Israel, and that is laying out a vision for regional peace and security. And what that means is a proactive vision and guidelines for us, both here in the US and those in Israel and across the region, guidelines for us to take forward through this Trump administration that helps outline how to achieve peace between Israel and the Arab states, but a diplomatic solution that very much integrates and prioritizes this goal of Palestinian statehood. So that is something that Biden can do in this last stretch, and it is something that we have seen presidents do before. So that kind of gives you a sort of overview of what we are going to be pressing the administration on in the next 70 plus days, and also talking to our partners in Congress about as well.
Thanks, Lily. And I just want to emphasize that these periods in various administrations have been moments when steps have really been taken that are meaningful. And I go back as far to Ronald Reagan in 1988 with the recognition of the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people was done in the lame duck period of Ronald Reagan, and the Clinton parameters were laid out by President Bill Clinton in December of 2000, and they remain really a benchmark. And I think that this idea of a Biden speech is very much picking up on the idea of updating the Clinton parameters and potentially even putting them forth at the UN as well. And then in 2016, Barack Obama didn't veto a very important Security Council resolution in December of 2016. And that was specifically on the question of the settlements and what their status was under international law. And so there's a lot of precedent for using this period productively. I see a couple of other questions in the chat, one about the joint resolution of disapproval that Senator Sanders has put forward. And Lily, last I checked in with you and with the team, we are working very, very closely with Senator Sanders' office and with other senators to figure out a strategy and a positioning, because the sales are approved. These resolutions are symbolic. They will not stop any actual sale of anything. And so the question is, how do you use the vote, which won't be successful, and even if it were successful, it would be purely symbolic. How do you use the opportunity of the vote to send a signal that there's support among Democratic senators for the use of American leverage to impact Israeli policy? And I think that's the issue. So Joel and others who've asked that question in this chat, I just would say we are in close contact with our allies. Anything you want to add on that, Lily?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks, Jeremy.
And anything on Gaza, there's, new efforts, they're covered in some media. I'm not sure how accurate it is about reports that Israel is planning to keep permanent control over parts of Gaza. Is there anything in particular that we've been advocating vis-a-vis that to the Biden administration in these last 60 days, 90 days?
That is a
Yeah,
good.
I don't think I think you're on mute. No, you're not, but I didn't hear you. I apologize.
I can follow up with more information about that.
Yeah, terrific. And the number of Dems who are on board with the joint resolution of disapproval, I don't know the number.
And that'll be a number that people keep very close to the vest. The benefits of being a member of Congress is that you can keep that information as tight as possible until the last moment, as I'm sure many, many will.
Yeah. And we will definitely be, pressing as issues arise. I mean, there's some specific questions being asked in the chat about particular things. This is a moment when the administration is freed of some of the political constraints that have held it back, but also can lay down some markers that set precedents, even if they are rolled back by the Trump administration. So I think it's an important moment, and we will continue to react to events as they happen. Anything you want to add before we close on the policy section, Lily?
No, I think those are the main things, and I'll just mention, because I see this in a question about the killing of Ezgi Egian on the West Bank, and just to say that we have been supportive of members leading letters and calling for an independent U.S. investigation into her death, and that's been something that's been very important to us to support those investigations.
Terrific. Well, I wanted to say thank you to Lily, and thank you to the whole government relations team that you lead, who do incredible work. And thank you as well to the political team that set us up for all the work that was done in the political cycle. I want to close by, addressing a question that says, for those who are in despair that this country has lost its moral compass, where do we go from here? And my answer is a good way of closing out this webinar, which is to say that the goal of those who are opposed to us is to, in fact, cause within us the despair that causes us to give up and walk away. That is precisely what the other side would like us to do in this long-term battle that we have for the soul of the country. This is a battle not only for political office, this is really a battle about the kind of country that we are going to have and we leave behind for our kids and our grandchildren. Frankly, it's also a battle for the soul of the Jewish community and whether or not we're going to speak out, as many of our older legacy organizations have not been doing sufficiently, whether it is about the behavior and the tenor of a president-elect like Donald Trump, or it is about the behavior of an administration and government led by Bibi Netanyahu and these far-right extremist settler leaders in Israel. It is incumbent upon us to jump back up off the floor, to dust ourselves off, to get back into the ring and keep up this fight. We represent the majority view on so many of these issues in the Jewish community. We have to find a better way as a Democratic party, as a liberal, progressive-leaning community, to communicate our views and to make the case to a broader electorate of the kinds of things that we stand for. We certainly have a lot to learn from our losses, and that we have to apply them to the next fight and the next and the next, and ultimately we will win. I'm not here to give hope. I am here to provide the to-do list that will allow us to create hope, and that is our job, and that is my answer to where we go from here. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for all the support for J Street. I am grateful to our team. I'm grateful to our supporters, and we will be with you in the days and weeks and months and years ahead as we continue this fight and go back towards winning and toward reclaiming the Congress and the White House in 2026 and 2028. Thank you very much.